right? Because before we answer the questions, and we're going to get to the questions, trust me, we got 100 minutes, right? We go longer, we go longer. I need to give you some context for all of this, right? So I'm looking over here, some different questions about direct injection additives and all that yet. Here we go. We're going to answer the questions yet. Hang on. Yeah, I'm reading the chat. I had to get over here. This again, I'm not used to doing the live stream thing here. So I had to get the piece up here. All right. So hang on. So a little bit of history here. You need to understand this stuff because there's context to everything. To answer some of these questions, you got to have the proper context. A little bit of history. So back in 1999, the guys at Joe Gibbs Racing were failing flat tappet camshafts in races. In fact, in 1999, Bobby Labonte finished second in the championship because he actually had 2 engines fail during the races. Both of those were due to flat tappet camshafts. Because we were a GM team and we were able to be part of their key partners program, we were introduced to Lubrizol. So Lubrizol is one of the 4 companies that actually makes oil and fuel additives. There's all these brands of products in the world, right? And you guys are asking about different things. But the reality is there's only 4 companies that actually make the molecules that get blended in with the oil that go into those products. Lubrizol is one of the largest. Back in 1941, they invented ZDDP, zinc dialkyl thiophosphate. We just call it zinc instead. It's easier to say. Well, working with the guys at Lubrizol, we developed, braking oils and the proper products for our race engines that solved all those problems. And in 2000, we went out and Bobby Labonte won the championship, and we went on and won more races and more championships. In fact, before applying the science of tribology to these engines, Joe Gibbs Racing had won about 16 races and 0 championships. After that, during our development program and the time I was there, we won 8 championships between the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series and won over 84 races. So it was a huge change by applying the science of tribology to these engines, transmissions, gears. We did everything, right? And we were very fortunate to have that close relationship with the guys at Lubrizol. And then there are some things changed there. And we started working closely with the guys at Afton, and we'll get to that later. All right, we're going to get to the questions. What we're going to do is we got to get a little more, we'll call it background, a little history here. So what does oil do, right? Because we have to answer these questions. You got to understand the perspective of what oil is. So oil has 5 jobs. It's going to clean, it's going to cool, it's going to transfer power, like especially a lot of modern cars that have variable valve timing systems, displacement on demand, things like that. Oil is a hydraulic fluid, not just a lubricant. Oil is also a seal. So my day job at Total Seal, I always use the phrase, oil is the gasket. It's what seals between the piston ring and the cylinder wall. That's why surface finish is so incredibly important, not just for lubricant retention in some areas, but it's also that gasket. You got to maintain that oil in order to have the proper seal. So efficiency is really, really important in terms of sealing. So oil's got all these other jobs besides just being a lubricant. Of course, as a lubricant, number 1 job is to reduce wear and then to reduce friction. So that's the basics of what oil is going to do. Now, I mentioned it before, there's only a handful of companies that actually make the stuff that goes into it. So a bottle of full synthetic, so that'd be a group 4, PAO type base oil. Of course, there's a whole variation on that, right? So just so everybody knows, when it comes to the definitions of synthetic, I'm completely aware of what that is. Later this fall, I mentioned going to visit the guys at Chevron Phillips. We're getting something worked out to make a trip down to Texas so I can go talk to the guys at Chevron Phillips, maybe do a tour of the plant possibly, but really have that in-depth explanation and the differences between a group 3, a group 4, and a group 5. We're going to dig into the synthetics in the video and give you all the details because it's a lot. Too much to answer today, right? All we would talk about today is just that, and we're not prepared for that. So just know that there's a big difference there. on those. So these are the companies that actually make additives on that right-hand side. On the left-hand side are the base oil suppliers. Okay. Now, when we're looking at these base oil types, when we're looking at really what you're looking at mainly is the temperature threshold. Now, there can be viscosity differences and all that, but for the same viscosity, when you go from a mineral oil to a synthetic, PAO in this case in the middle, and esters at the bottom, we're keeping those as synthetics. You can see that difference in temperature range. So that's really where synthetics shine, is at extreme temperatures. So if you're in an Arctic situation where it's really, really cold, so, in a winter condition where you're getting, below freezing, like you're getting below, Fahrenheit wise, if you're below zero, that's really cold. If you're getting -10, -20 degrees Celsius, that's really cold. That's where the synthetics shine over the conventional oils. Inversely, at high temperature, they also do really well. So for turbocharged engines, that's where synthetics have a big advantage, because the high temperatures that are exposed to the oil from the turbocharger, oil-cooled turbochargers, that oil is seeing really, really high temperatures, especially when the engine shuts down. So when you turn the engine off, that oil wants to coke sitting inside those turbo bearings. It is there to cool, but now that oil's not flowing anymore. And that temperature goes up initially because there's no more cooling. So that temperature spike can cause damage to the oil. Of course, there's piston rings and things like that, or oil's being exposed to all the time. So that's where synthetics have that advantage, is that they can operate better than a mineral oil at the edges, at the extremes of temperature. So when you're in very cold climates, synthetics are your friend. When you're operating in really hot environments, turbochargers, things like that, that's where synthetics are your friend. So we want to make sure everybody understands those pieces really well. And the key is this: all oils lubricate. So the same base oil that is used to make engine oil, transmission fluid, and gear oil. In fact, you could take what they call a 6 centistoke base oil. So that's 6 centistokes in flow at 100 degrees Celsius, would be used in all three applications. But the reality is, the difference between those products isn't the base oil, it's the additive package. So all oils will lubricate. You could put that gear oil in that engine, right? I think the guy from Freedom Works, right? He put some gear oil in his Cummins and drove around, right? It lasted. So it's not that will it work. The question is, how long will it work? Under what conditions will it work? That's the key thing. All oils lubricate. The question is, how long and under what conditions can it work? Because prior to 1941, there were hardly any additives in the oil. We're going to cover that in some detail in the motor oil history video that I'm working on. That's going to be coming out this fall. That, for at least 50 years of the internal combustion engine's life, there weren't additives. You had base oil. So whatever the properties of the base oil were all you had to provide lubrication. Of course, what happened back then? Engines didn't live as long. They wore out faster, and the oil life was much shorter. Back to all oils lubricate. The question is for how long, and in what conditions. So by adding additives, having better base oils, we extend that range of what's possible. But it's all about application specific chemistry. That's the real question right here. We're going to get to filters. I see that. That is one of the 10 questions. So hang on, we're going to get there, right? So the next thing we want to talk about is the bigger question here. And I thought this was a great question, which is why I wanted to kind of pose it before we jumped off into them. It's like, how does one reprogram our brains to try brands of oil you've had bad luck with, or whatever? So of course, Pennzoil, right? That was a pretty common one when we did some of the Pennzoil Ultra Platinum videos. People are like, man, back in the day, Pennzoil and Quaker State, that stuff sludged your engine up. Well, that was because those old school Pennsylvania oils were high paraffins. And if you didn't have a solvent dewaxing process done to that base oil, it would leave waxy things. But the reality is those Pennsylvania crudes had a very high viscosity index compared to the Gulf crudes, which were more naphthenic. They had a low viscosity index. So the Gulf crudes tended to clean the engine better, but they didn't have that high viscosity index, which would provide higher temperature lubricity and protection, right? The oils would thin out too quickly as they got hotter. Well, the Pennsylvania oils could hold that viscosity. It worked better at higher temperatures. Downside was the wax. So some companies found ways to do solvent dewaxing or propane dewaxing to remove that excess wax so that you didn't have those problems that you saw in Quaker State and Pennzoil. But that was 40 years ago. No one is using in mainstream oils, at least in the US, that old school Group 1 process where it was solvent refined. Today, even a regular conventional oil is somewhat hydrocracked, it's hydro-treated. It's not a Group 1 process, it's a Group 2 process. And we'll cover that in a future video because there's a whole thing there. Again, we could almost every one of these questions could be its own video. Probably will be actually more kind of thing about. We'll probably have to do that to really give you a detailed, in-depth answer on these things. So when we start to look at what's in these oils and how to think, like I said, old school, it was Group 1. A conventional oil today is a Group 2. So now we're talking about having, Group 3s, GTLs, other things are possible. Oil today is very different in every way. In fact, you couldn't even make an oil exactly the same today as something that was made 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of the chemicals have been removed or gone. Different EPA, European version of EPA has changed rules. And so everything is different. The reality is you've been marketed to, there's over 150 years of oil marketing. It's hard to break that, which is why this channel exists, right? We want to try to, oh my gosh, guys from Ridgeland, Mississippi, remembers my dad's go-kart tracks. I remember racing around there as a kid. That was pretty funny. How long has GTL been around? Well, GTL has been around for quite some time. That was back to one of the interesting things about all of this, right? There's different changes in base oils. That's the reason why I've done the videos and tried the Pennzoil Ultra Platinum, because Shell had this product for a while, but they wouldn't sell it to anybody else. So you couldn't get it. So I was curious. I was like, well, I hear all these rumors about how great this stuff is. Like it's PAO-like, but it's still a Group 3 and it's got better solvency, all these things. That's why I started picking it up and trying it and making videos about it, because I'm just curious about it. And again, back to what's the point of the channel is to break through all the marketing speak. Because as I said before, I hate oil marketing. I love oil chemistry. I find this stuff fascinating, but I hate the marketing part. So what I want to try to do is pull back the curtain, show you what's really going on, what the real stuff is, and then try not to make decisions based on brands. The brand is not where it's at. The brand should be the last choice. The first choice needs to be based on the chemistry for the application. Allow the application to dictate the chemistry. If you got a turbo DI engine, you should use a synthetic oil with a proper additive package, meaning a lower level of calcium, no sodium in the oil. It's going to be an API, SP type product. That's what's going to give you proper protection. It's not about the brand name. It's about the chemistry. If there's a brand that you like, choose that. That's fine. That's great. It doesn't matter what the brand is. It matters what's in the bottle. Because I've never met an engine that could read an oil label. Can't. But they can Every single one of them can tell the difference in chemistry, if it's the right chemistry or not. And the whole goal of this channel and what we're going to be doing is teaching you how to recognize, because the hints are all there. My job is to teach you how to read the information and understand and just pick the correct chemistry for your application. Because there's way too many people. Oops, sorry about that. There's way too many people out there asking if I just to be able to answer everybody's question about what recommended. Plus, I can't tell you. There's just too many oils. I can't tell you what every oil is. But if I can give you the framework, you can read it for yourself. And there you go. All right, awesome. Yeah, bad fuel injectors on DI engines. Oh, absolutely. That's 100% true, Jake. Yeah, if you have dirty injectors, I mean, fuel is the number one enemy of your oil. Absolutely. Number one enemy of your oil is fuel. In fact, one of our videos coming up really soon is a deep dive on that. That I'm sitting here saying how brand doesn't matter. Check out this video when it comes out about fuel, because you're going to see that the choice of fuel is just as important as your choice of brand of oil. It's I get it. Not all calcium is the same, but there's calcium, there's overbased, there's neutral, there's sulfonates, there's salicylates. But the reality is, when we did the testing with Oak Ridge National Lab, it really didn't care in terms of LSPI if it was salicylate or sulfonate. Now, the reality is the overbased ones are the ones that are in the highest concentration. The neutral detergents are just there for deposit control. The overbased ones are there for acid neutralization. So the majority of the calcium content in an oil will be overbased. So what we're talking about is the overbased additive. This is the one that could be problematic for LSPI, which we're going to cover. We're going to get into that. That's one of the questions. So we're going to jump into that. So, all right, let me go ahead, move on, because I'm starting to read the comments, and then we're asking stuff, and I need to get back to the 10, because the same thing. You guys are asking the questions here in the comments that were also asked. So let's go ahead and jump into our bigger picture. Number 10. All right. Where's Paul and the band from late night, right? This is the David Letterman, our top 10 list. Starting at number 10, working to the front. All right. What viscosity oil should I use? What are your thoughts on why some engines reportedly call for different weight oils in the same vehicle based on its country? Is it regulatory? Does it mean that any grade of oil within reason will work in an engine? Do heavier weights provide better protection but lower fuel economy, and the lighter weights provided better fuel economy at the cost of engine wear? This is what the world needs to know. All right. So the simple answer to that question, I'm going to do this. It's 100% fuel economy. That's why. The EPA here in the United States, for those who are here in the US, the CAFE requirements, the corporate average fuel economy requirements, avoiding those fines is like one of the number one goals. So when they're looking, OEMs are looking at oil viscosity recommendations, they're doing that to gain fuel economy. And in fact, one of the changes with the new GF7 oil spec coming up, which we'll mention later, is an increase in how much fuel economy benefit there is, because we've already gone down to 0.8, right? We've seen that in my daughter's car. The Toyota is already a 0W8. Why is that Corolla here in the US call for a 0W8, but in Australia it doesn't? The difference is the CAFE requirements here in the US are much stricter. That same car somewhere else, it could have a 520 or a 020 in it. What's the difference? Here in the US, we're squeezing every bit of fuel economy out of that engine as possible. That is the key difference. And when it comes to viscosity, we need to think about this. All right, let's pull this back up. All right, the Strybeck curve. So this is kind of a lube engineering tool we use. So if you think about it in terms of sliding speed, the Z and P in the bottom down here. That is viscosity is Z times load or times speed divided by load. So think about somebody water skiing. If you get a kid behind the boat, a light little kid on 2 skis, the boat doesn't have to go very fast to pull that kid up out of the water. Right? We just basically did lubrication. When the boat's not moving, the kid's in the water. As the boat begins to move away, the kid comes up on plane. And then once the boat's really moving at speed, the kid's up top of the water. The kid on top of the water is your full film hydrodynamic lubrication. That's this area right over here. Of course, my mouse doesn't work, but that's over here on the far right-hand side of the screen, that lower right-hand side. That's full film hydrodynamic lubrication. The mixed film, when the boat's just getting the kid up out of the water, that's the mixed film. When the boat stopped and the kid's in the water, that's your boundary condition. So in the boundary condition, that's where your additive package kicks in. So if you watch the video I did about the 0W8, what you'll notice, as we talked about, is that as the viscosity grades have gone lower, what the OEMs have done is they've added more additives. They're using higher quality base oils, and they're putting in more additives such as molybdenum in order to protect the engine in this boundary condition over here. Because what happens is when you go to lower viscosity, right? Remember, ZN divided by P, it's the same output. The load is still the same in the engine. Engine RPMs are the same, but we lower the Z, we lower the viscosity. What does it do? It's going to shift the Strybeck curve. You're going to be in boundary sooner, which means more additives. So that's how the OEMs are providing that offset and protection, is they're changing the additive package in the oil to enable lower viscosity. All things being equal, if you just lower viscosity, you will increase wear. There's more wear in the boundary condition than there is in full film. That's just facts. Why, when we saw the thick versus thin video, we saw less wear with the 2050. I know it's a race motor. I understand all that. Less wear, the 2050 versus the 520. Because in that case, everything else was the same. The base oil types were the same. The additives were the same. The fuel was the same. Nothing else changed. All we did was change the base oil viscosity. And that's what led to a reduction in wear, because the Strybeck curve is always spot on, right? This is what you can trust, right? Right here is Lube Engineering 101. This is your foundation. Okay, with that being said, now let's look at this. We have to understand that there is a temperature effect on viscosity. And I don't pay attention to these different oils. These are all race applications, but you can kind of use it as a bit of an analogy. All right, let's pop this up here real quick. A 0W5, which that was a made up number because it would be less than a 0.8 today, actually, even thinner than a 0.8. It'd be a 0W. In a pro stock race engine that runs at 100 degrees Fahrenheit oil temperature, the operating viscosity of that oil is actually higher than a 5W20 at 220 degrees in a NASCAR engine. And that is actually still thicker than a 15W50 is in a sprint car engine running at 300 degrees. So the operating temperature of your oil makes a massive difference in what's going on. So when you are living in a cold environment, let's move it over here, right? We'll pop this up. This is your SAE J300 chart. If you're living in a very cold environment where the overnight low is -20, then you need to be running an oil that's probably a 10W something, at least, right? If the overnight low could be as low as -30, yeah, you should be running at least a 5W, maybe a 0W on the front side, because however cold it is outside is going to determine where you need to be in terms of that winter, that low temperature number. Now, the high temperature number is going to be what's happening, for the bearings and things like that, right? So the OEM is typically going to go with, we're going to get the Dexos. We're going to get there, right? Almost every question you guys are asking here, we are going to get to in this. Just hang on. So one of the keys we got to understand is that base oil or the viscosity choice needs to be based on, number one, what's in your owner's manual. Trusting them that they've figured it out, but also use your brain too, right? We're going to go through a framework later in the video that will allow you to, without any question, find the exact right viscosity for your engine, where you live, and how you drive. Because there isn't a single one size fits all best oil. There's not one viscosity that's better for everything. Application always dictates chemistry. The choice of additive package, the choice of viscosity, that's chemistry. So just understand that the OEMs are going to go, especially in the US, they're going as low as possible for fuel economy. That may not always be in your best interest. So like my daughter's car calls for the 08. We're going to be running the 0W8 and the 0W16 like we did before it was the 08 was available. We're going to run them back to back, an A-B test. And we're going to show you the results in a future video so that you can see for yourself. Additive packages are the same between the 16 and the 8. And we're going to show you the results. That way you can make the decision for yourself what viscosity choice is best for you based on the science and the data versus me just telling you, oh yeah, you should run a 530 in your car because the owner's manual for somebody in the UAE said you could run 5W30 because they don't have the same fuel economy requirements there and they're in a hotter environment. So the OE is going with a thicker viscosity oil for that reason. See, there's logic there and you can apply that, but let's have some data so that way you're not just doing it based on speculation. You can do it based on data. All right, so let's go to the next slide here. Boom. And this is one more little piece of viscosity. And we talked about this a little bit in the video about the vanishing viscosity where we saw the oil shearing down. And I want to mention this because it's really key to understanding base oil viscosity. I mentioned that a little bit ago. So when you start looking at a 0W30 versus a 5W30 versus a 10W30, they're all a 30 grade. So at 100 degrees C, they're all going to flow between 9.2 and 12.5 centistokes. That's the flow rate that SA calls for. But to hit that winter number, to be able to flow and have the cranking ability at cold temperature, the way it gets there is by using a thinner base oil. So to get back to the 30, it requires adding more viscosity modifier, which is why the wider the split between the number before the W and after the W means there's going to be more opportunity for that oil to shear, not only permanently, but also temporarily. And temporary shear can increase wear in the engine. Of course, permanent shear also increases wear in the engine because the viscosity is going down. And I'm going to go back to it, right? I'm just going to pop right back. This right here, not my opinion, this right here says when you lower viscosity, you shift the Strybeck curve, which will increase wear unless you do something different with the additive package to offset that. So everything else being equal, when you lower viscosity, you increase wear. Period. Full stop. End of story. Okay. Now, question number 9. All right. How can oil impact combustion? Right. We saw a lot of questions in the chat about LSPI, GDI engines, and things like that. I'm going to do my very best to get through this fairly quickly because we already used up almost half our time already. And we just got to number 9. We'll get going, I promise. I got a lot to say, and you guys a lot of questions. So if we go long, we go long. So here we go. And let me also throw this back up because I know there's more people on, just in case you didn't know. This will be available at the end of the stream. I'll go turn it on probably within about 15, 20 minutes. After we're done, that discount code will be active. That it's not going to be active now. Okay, question. How can oil impact combustion? So we have some awesome answers here because when we're talking about LSPI, we're talking about an abnormal combustion event, right? So here in direct injection engine, this is an example of that piston you can see over there where it's broken and it's fractured down. That's because of this stochastic pre-ignition event. Some manufacturers have stopped calling it LSPI because that was low speed pre-ignition. Now they're just calling it SPI, stochastic pre-ignition. Stochastic is a fancy word for random. But they know that in turbocharged DI engines, especially, but any direct injection engine, there is this tendency to have this really abnormal combustion event that can cause catastrophic engine damage. Fortunately enough, I was able to be part of a group working with Oak Ridge National Lab. I'll pull this up so you can get a little more view on it. So this is several years ago, but it was us and GM and Ford, ORNL, NREL, University of Tennessee, a bunch of different groups at Oak Ridge working together. And we really looked at what was happening with this phenomenon. Why were we having these abnormal combustion events, and what impact did the oil have on that? So we did some pretty deep research, and Oak Ridge started to do and started really messing around with understanding what was happening with that direct injection, right? And we noticed that one thing is that the location of the injector, right? And again, my mouse, I don't think it shows up on what you guys can see, but in this picture, you see a vertically mounted direct injector where it's pumping in right there next to the plug. Well, what can happen is if that injector is laid to the side, it can now get more fuel wash against the cylinder wall, which one of the questions earlier was, what does this do? That's why we typically see higher fuel dilution in a direct injection engine than a port injected engine, which can lead to having to change the oil more often because fuel is the number one enemy of your oil. When that injector lays over and you get more impingement on the cylinder wall, two bad things happen. You get more fuel dilution, which lowers the life of your oil, but also, which is really bad, is that when you get fuel dilution in your oil, it can cause low speed pre-ignition. Now, to understand why this is specific to direct injection engines, we really have to understand the timing. Engines don't burn. Hear me come back and say that. Engines do not burn liquid fuel. Engines only burn vaporized fuel. The job of the injector is to atomize the fuel, make it a small droplet. You've ever been to a Boy Scout, cookout, camp out? We build big giant fires, right? If you throw a log on that fire, it doesn't burn right away. But if you throw a piece of kindling on that fire or a leaf on it, burns right up because it's small. When the mass is small, it's able to burn. Think about the same way with fuel droplets. If it's a big droplet of fuel, it's hard for that to vaporize. But if it's really small, for that amount of heat, it can vaporize more easily. Once it's vaporized, it can burn. So in a port injected or direct inject or a port injected or carbureted engine, there's 720 degrees in a 4-cycle engine. What means is that with these engines, you got about 180 degrees on each stroke. So total, that piston coming down and the piston coming back up, you're going to have pretty close to 360 degrees of crankshaft rotation for that liquid fuel that came in to fully vaporize. Again, on the intake stroke, it's coming in. On the compression stroke, it's coming in. Now, because the intake valve opens before top dead center on the exhaust stroke, that ignition timing advance equals that out. So it really is about 360 degrees, all the way down, all the way back up for the fuel to vaporize in a carbureted or port fuel injected engine. In a direct injection engine, half. The fuel doesn't start coming in until that piston's already past top dead center on its way back up. So on the intake stroke, that injector is not firing. It only begins to fire once it's reached past TDC. So it's less than 180 degrees in some cases for the time-wise. So because that reduced amount of time, that's where there's more opportunity for the fuel to mix with the oil. And when the fuel mixes with the oil, really bad things happen, right? So here you can see that's 3 different oil chemistries blended with 10% ethanol. I mean, that's huge, right? Check that out. I mean, that one on the far left, that's completely emulsified. The one in the middle is like partially emulsified, and the one on the far right is just a hard split. It won't emulsify the ethanol at all. So this is one of the key things why there's so much changed, right? Is that when LSPI became an issue, API SP came out. API SP is the current oil spec where we started doing new engine tests for the oil spec. That's why the oil chemistry changed so dramatically. That's why you went from having oils with 2,000 or 3,000 parts per million calcium detergent, and now it's half that or a third of that. That's why sodium went away, is because the detergent's ability to emulsify the fuel played a huge role in this. So with that indirect injection, like I mentioned, that side injector, there's more opportunity for that fuel to mix with the oil. And when it does, really, really bad things happen. Let's get to the next one. All right. So one of the theories here is, I'll pull this up so you can see it, is that when that oil and fuel mix, of course, the viscosity goes down and you've got all this temperature stuff going on in the ring zone. Now those flying droplets of pre or mixed oil and fuel now have a completely different octane value than the fuel was to begin with. So this stuff, these little droplets, they're nasty and they can create a lot of bad things. Yeah, you guys are mentioning about the PEA. That's one of the reasons why. Here, I'll hop back out and we'll address that real quick. Yes, that's why PEA-based fuel detergents are so important, is because they can clean the injectors, especially in GDI engines. You got to make sure that injector is clean. And PEA chemistry it's not about the brand. Now, just a little fun fact, Chevron Oronite, part of Chevron, invented the polyetheramine, the PEA chemistry. So that's why Chevron Techron, it's not the only one. There's ones that have a higher concentration, but the Chevron Techron Complete, the concentrate, is a great one to use, just because that's their chemistry. They invented it. And the key thing is the PEA cleans those injectors so that you get better atomization of the fuel. Better atomization leads to better vaporization, which means you have fewer problems with LSPI and longer oil life, because you're getting less fuel in the oil. It's a 2 for 2 there. It's a really great thing. All right. So next one here. So just to, science, not speculation. I can tell you all these things, but let's show you the results. When we ran some different chemistries, different formulations here, when you had a higher level of calcium, when you had calcium and sodium mixed together, we had knock. When we reduced the calcium and added some molybdenum to it, right? Lower calcium, not the lowest calcium, just a mid-level of calcium with some molybdenum, no knock events. It's just a huge difference how much lowering that calcium, adding some moly, which now you guys have seen who are doing used oil analysis and you're on any of the forums, you'll see that almost all the modern GF6 API SP oils have more moly in them now and less calcium than in the past. Why? Now you know why. You just saw the results yourself. When you change that mixture, that balance of the additives, it reduces the number of knock events. You go from a whole bunch to none. It just changes the way the oil interacts with the fuel, which changes how combustion occurs in your engine. I know it's mind-blowing, but it's really freaking cool kind of stuff. Right now, next piece is, and you can take notes of this one, higher levels of calcium, higher levels of sodium increase the LSPI tendency or SPI tendency. Magnesium is neutral, which is why you're seeing more magnesium showing up in the oils anymore. What fuel additives have PEA? Well, Chevron Techron does, Redline does, their S1, AMSOIL does, Gum Out All-in-One. There's a whole bunch, right? I think STP has one that has PEA. You can always check on the MSDS sheet or the SDS sheet to see on the ingredient sheet, does it list polyetheramine? Most of them that have it will put it on there. That way you can know. But what also decreases LSPI tendency is ZDP and molybdenum. Now, the trick is with API SP, you're on the passenger car grades, 10W30 and lower viscosity, you are limited on the amount of ZDP you can put in the oil. So you can't put in more than 800, and everyone was already maxed out. That's why the molybdenum levels had to increase. It's because they couldn't go up more on the ZDP. They're in a 600 minimum, 800 maximum window. So most people are trying to blend to 700 to keep in the range. The only choice you had was to bump up the moly. So that's one of the reasons why oil has changed. But this is also one of the reasons that's made oil better. These modern API SP oils are the best off-the-shelf motor oils ever made. Why? Because calcium, sodium competed against the ZDP and the moly. So when you bring down the calcium levels, get rid of the sodium, and you bump up the moly levels, you have a better oil. Straight up, flat out, they work better. And that's great news, right? Regardless of what brand it is, if it's API SP, it's going to do better in terms of wear protection than the API SM oil did. The worst oils ever made were API SM, in my opinion, because they were super high detergent, tons of calcium. And it's just, they were what put us in business at Gibbs, right? Is they were such a high level of calcium, they were wiping out flat type camshafts everywhere. And as you'll see in an upcoming video, you can run a modern API SP oil with a flat tappet camshaft, and it runs just fine. All right, I'm telling you that now. We'll see it in the video in the next month. All right, so let's get on to the next question because I am really going slow. But we got all day, right? I don't know if you got all day. I got all day. This is my day off. So, all right. So, question number 8. And I've seen this question already in the comments. I told you we were going to get to all of them, right? That if you just hang out, we're going to get to all of them. What harm can be done using Rotella T6 530 instead of a passenger car motor oil? Basically, using a diesel oil that is SP rated instead of using a PCMO for increased engine protection. Is there any harm? Thanks. All right. This is one of my favorite questions. I am not a big fan of using diesel oils in race engines because diesel oils have a higher level of ZDP than passenger car oils. We already did a video about that a little bit. And the reality is those diesel oils also have a higher level of dispersant chemistry in it. So especially if you're using something like methanol as your fuel, it can hold more methanol. We already showed you that in the LSPI section, right? So I'm not a big fan of using a diesel oil as a way of getting more zinc in your oil. If you have an engine that the oil analysis says you need more anti-wear protection, the better way of doing it isn't using a diesel oil. It's actually using an oil with a higher level of zinc in it because you have an application that needs that. And we're going to show that in an upcoming video. But to answer this question specifically, if you look at this, this is the ACEA. So that's the European version of API. All ACEA specs are for both gasoline and diesel oils. So anyone that's using a product, say like Mobil 1, where it happens to say on the back of the bottle, ACEA A3 B4, if it says that, you are running a diesel oil. Yeah, any oil that has the ASEA ratings on the back of it is also a diesel oil because all ACEA oils are designed for both gasoline and diesel use. So if you're using Shell Rotella T6 530 and it says API SP, it just means it's an API SP oil that happens to have more dispersant chemistry in it designed to handle soot. If you have a direct injection engine, that higher soot handling could be good because DI engines create soot, but you got to make sure that it doesn't have too much detergent in it. So you just got to see. Yeah, that's why I'm a big fan of doing the used oil analysis, is that it will tell you whether or not that oil works good for your engine. But the key is many oils anymore are actually made for both gasoline and diesel. And it's fine to use one of those. In fact, most people are using them without even knowing they're doing that. So that one's a pretty easy one right there. Okay, next question. Here we go. Do longer drain intervals provide better protection? So the question is right here. It is, what do you say to the people that argue that the longer the oil is in the engine, the more protection it does? They believe there's less wear metals once the detergents have worn off. All right, this is a fun one. All right, so there's this idea that obviously detergents, they're basic, and anyone that's done anything with like a pool or a hot tub knows that, if you get the pool too acidic, you haven't put enough neutralizer in there, it can get you. But if you put too much neutralizer in there, it becomes basic, and then it can also cause problems, right? So this was something that came up in the days when you had those crazy high TBN oils. And that theory was that crazy high TBN would cause the wear metals to go up initially and then drop over time. That's the theory. Whether or not it's true or not, you would really need to do some detailed study. But what you have to understand is this. When I've seen that presented, what I've never seen anyone do when they presented this theory is start off with a 0-hour sample right out of the engine. Because that's the key, right? Is that if you're going to put that oil in, you need to take a 0-hour sample before the engine's even run. Because no engine is clean right off the go. Then take your 0-hour sample, then take your 3,000-mile sample, and then see what it says. How much difference was there? Then you can take your 6,000 or 9,000 or 12,000-mile samples and compare it. So without the 0-hour sample to know how dirty the engine was to begin with, you can kind of fool yourself. So one thing I want to look at here is I put up a couple of things here for you to keep in mind, right? And this is a good example right here of just because you've gone longer doesn't mean it's going to work better. So here's this guy that had this Amazon, synthetic 020 went 12,000 miles. The label said it could go like 20,000 miles, but the oil is completely oxidized and you have a high level of copper. Well, that defeats the theory that the detergents have worn off and now you're getting somehow another better protection. Absolutely not. There's no way that older oil, now that it's gone too far, is providing better protection. The other theory behind all this stuff was that the carbon that's building up in the oil, turning it black, that carbon is like graphite, it's lubricious, and it's going to provide better protection. The downside of that theory is that there are dispersants in the oil that are tying up that carbon that keep it from being able to react with things. In fact, in a diesel engine, the number one thing that causes wear in a diesel engine is the soot, the carbon from partial combustion. That's why diesel oils turn black, is because the dispersants are tying up all the carbon, all the soot in the engine. In fact, when somebody like Caterpillar or Cummins, when they do engine testing, they pre-soot the oil to increase the severity. They use carbon black, a soot surrogate, just straight carbon. They pour it in the oil to try to simulate pulling it all in to be able to increase the wear in the test. So if by putting more carbon in the oil was going to provide better protection, they would not be doing that to increase the severity of the test. So that's just one of those crazy internet myths. Two other things to keep in mind is that the math will lie to you. So if you're only basing off of a wear rate, total wear metals per 1,000 miles, total wear metals per 1,000 miles works really well if you happen to have oil samples that are between, say, 4,000 and 6,000 miles. So that the number isn't dead on, but you're just looking at those numbers. It takes out that variation. But when you go under that, it tends to skew the wear higher. When you go over that, it skews it lower. That's just the math, right? If you're going to use per 1,000 miles, you can't compare a 3,000 mile sample to a 12,000 mile sample and be able to look at apples to apples. The math's going to skew the 3,000 one higher. It's going to skew the 12,000 mile lower. So wear rate per 1,000 miles, and I do it all the time, right? Any reports I send, I put it on there. But I will also sometimes remove it if the comparison isn't fair. I don't want to fool someone into thinking something. If the samples are close enough that you can look at it and utilize it, it's good. But if the samples are too far spread apart, it's not useful. So these are some things where people get confused. Also, too, oil filters tend to get better the longer you use them. Most cases, right? We got more coming on the end about filters. So just understand that no, running your oil longer does not mean that it's doing a better job protecting. That is absolutely not the case. There is no science to back that up. All right, number 6. How often should I change my oil? I've already seen that one a ton in the comments and questions here. So yeah, Jonathan, yeah, I don't recommend any additives ever. I don't care what they say that it is. That was one of the questions on the exam to be a certified lubrication specialist is, when is it appropriate to use an aftermarket additive in a crankcase or gearbox? And the answer was never. That was the one right answer. So that's my answer to that one. Okay. How often should I change my oil? Right? He does short trip driving. So should he change the oil every 2,000 miles or every 4 months? To answer that question, we need to go to this lady, right? Dr. Shirley Schwartz, AKA Sister Sludge. Like, I never met her, but I happened to have met and worked with a couple of guys that did work with Dr. Schwartz. Her nickname was Sister Sludge. And within the tribology world, her famous saying was she could make anyone's oil fail in less than 3,000 miles. All she had to do was put it in her mother's car, actually her grandmother's car. So her grandmother lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and she would drive 1 mile every morning to Mass, and then 1 mile every afternoon, other direction, to the market every day. So 2 short trips a day. And you can imagine in the middle of a Wisconsin winter, how much fuel and water got sucked into that oil. So it didn't matter the amount of miles. That wasn't the thing. And even time really didn't matter, because in the summer it was different than it was in the wintertime. So Dr. Schwartz, along with 2 other gentlemen, developed the GM oil life system. They did this back in the 80s, way before anyone even knew what it was about. When they put OnStar in the GM cars, they began collecting data on the Cadillacs and the Corvettes that had it. And when those cars went to dealerships and did oil changes, they actually collected samples from real engines in the field and began to do correlation and came up with a matrix, an algorithm that could predict oil life based on the operating conditions of the engine. Now, one of the questions toward the end I've already seen in the chat is, Mother Superior Sludge. That's good. Sister Sludge, she's pretty awesome. Never met her. Mother Superior Sludge, I might be afraid of, But they developed this algorithm that would basically be a debit credit system based on injector duty cycle and engine operating temperature. There's also a clock in the background that does run, because eventually, if you have a whole lot of contamination and you let it sit long enough, it will go bad, right? Go back to the "Does old oil go bad" video we had. It will show you, yes, oil goes bad over time. Even if you're not even using it, it can go bad. It's a lot longer time, but it can go bad depending upon what's happening in the system. So we're actually going to do a deep dive video about that and talk more about Dr. Schwartz and the other group of guys and how they did this in a future video where we can really get into the details. But the idea is essentially, yes, the more short trip driving you do, your oil change interval needs to be adapted for that. My recommendation would be do used oil analysis. Don't change your oil change interval based off what someone told you to do. Only base that off of what used oil analysis data tells you. That's the only way you're going to know for what oil you use, the car you have, where you live, how you drive. That is how you get the A+ answer. Now, I understand that there are, we'll call it generic advice you can follow that will keep you going. All right. You call the guy that or gal that graduated last in medical school, right? With a C average. Doctor. Is that the person you want doing brain surgery on you? No, probably not. You probably want the valedictorian, the guy or gal that got an A, that put in the extra time and spent the extra hours working and studying and practicing to be the very best. If you want to be the very best with your lubrication, you're going to need data, not opinions, data. Used oil analysis gives you data. Full stop, end of story. All right. This is one of my favorite ones because obviously racing oil, near and dear to my heart. What's the difference between racing oil and regular oil? Well, best way to describe that is, what's the difference between slick tires and wet weather tires? Think about a race tire. Say a Formula One tire, for example. Every Formula One race, like past weekend at Spa, right? They had, when the dry conditions, they have soft compound tires. That soft compound tire gives them more grip, but it doesn't live anywhere near as long. That's your race oil, by the way. Compare that slick, soft compound tire to a truck tire, on a Western Star. What's the difference? That Western Star tire has got big grooves in it, made for all kinds of weather, and it's a super hard compound. Well, fun fact, the guy that won the first 500-mile race at Darlington Speedway, where my dad won in NASCAR, he used truck tires. Everyone else was using car tires that were softer compounds, but he used truck tires, which were a harder compound. And because the Darlington Raceway, the pavement, the asphalt, didn't just have rocks mixed in it, it had shells mixed in it. So it was eating the tires. By putting that harder compound tire on, it was able to last longer, fewer pit stops. He won the race. What does this mean to do with oils? Regular oils are like that truck tire. They're designed for like marathon runners, right? It's designed for low intensity, long duration. Your race oils, they're like what Usain Bolt wears. High intensity, short duration. And anyone knows anything about running knows that the shoes that sprinters use, right? The Olympics going on right now. Those guys in the Olympics that are running sprints, their shoes are physically different in design and material than the shoes of the guys who are running marathons. So it's the same thing. Does it mean that the marathon shoe is a better shoe than the sprinter shoe? No. What did I say earlier? Application always dictates chemistry. This is why I put that one question about reprogramming your brain earlier, right? Because I see Joe, I know the discount code doesn't work right now. It will work after the live stream is over. I haven't turned it live yet because I want everybody paying attention here. We'll do the live stream. We'll do the promo code after the live stream is over. We'll make it live. But just know it's not working right now. But the reason I put that quote up there earlier about reprogramming your brain is that, yes, we've been marketed to, right? I'm as guilty as anybody, right? As a kid, being around NASCAR, I remember the crew chief had me go to the Kmart in Port Orange, Florida. This is probably 1998, 1999. And I bought every quart of Mobil 1 on the shelf, 5W30. Went to the racetrack, put it in the race car, ran the Daytona 500. I'm like, this must be the best oil ever. Because I just bought this oil at Kmart. And we just went and finished 10th in the Daytona 500. This is all I'm ever going to put in my car ever again. I understand. I get it. I understand how that mentality comes in. But once you know more, you realize it had nothing to do with that brand. We were just lucky that it had the right chemistry for the application at that moment in time. A year later, we wanted to go do that. Our engine builder said, no, don't do it. Don't even try to do it. Why? The formulation had changed. They had changed that balance between the ZDP and the calcium. And a year later, you couldn't do that. The brand was the same. The base oil was the same. The additive balance is different. Application always dictates chemistry. Just let that sink in. Forget about brands. Brands don't matter, right? That's the key things. Brands don't matter. Whew. All right, sorry about that. Racing stuff gets me all fired up a little bit. Anyway, all right, next question. Here we go. What about oil filters? So it's hard to determine the absolute micron rating and bypass PSI of oil filters. Some OEM filters seem to be inefficient, like Toyota's. How important is efficient filtering and bypass PSI? Is there a good enough? Okay, so hop over here real quick. Had lunch yesterday with one of the former engineers at Wix. So Wix filters, now, full disclosure, they were a sponsor when I was at Joe Gibbs Racing, but we actually used their products and they actually helped us solve real problems. In fact, we were using wire screen filters. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up real quick. Boom. So if you want a deep dive on filters, we did this video on the Total Seal YouTube channel. You can go check that out. That's where there's a lot of information on how we did the filter testing. And the reason why I did this wire screen versus paper media test in this particular video is because when we were at Joe Gibbs Racing, Daytona, Talladega, every 10th of a horsepower mattered. And we had $1 million+ dynos that could measure tenths of horsepower. And we found that if we ran a low restriction, high flow wire media filter, right? That's not saying everything else. It was a wire media filter. It would flow more oil, and that would let us slow the pump down. When we slowed the pump down, that reduced drag, lost horsepower. So we wanted to do that. But we started failing bearings. And we couldn't figure out, we talked to the guys at Lubrizol, went through all this stuff. What it came down to was that because we had compromised our filtration, we were letting more particles go through. Most importantly, we were letting titanium particles go through. We used titanium retainers, valve retainers, and they would wear. And the titanium wear debris was very hard and very sharp, and that what was causing the bearing problems. Wasn't an oil flow issue, wasn't a viscosity issue, wasn't an oil chemistry issue. It was 100% down to the filter. So the guys at Wix developed a synthetic media package for us that would allow the same amount of flow as the wire media filter, but it could pick up those particles that the wire media couldn't, because the wire media is absolute. It wasn't capturing anything less than 30 microns. And it was stuff that was smaller than 30 microns is what was causing the problem, right? So when you look at cellulose media versus synthetic media, there's a lot more pores per square inch with a synthetic media. And these guys can can basically fine tune the construction of these medias to target what's going on in your engine. So by having a filter media tailored to our application, we were actually able to remove those titanium particles, and it basically prevented those failures. We stopped having those failures. We could never have to change viscosity of the oil. We could run that lighter oil. We could still have the pump slow down. So we had the horsepower gain we wanted without compromising the efficiency. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and why I was talking to the guys at Wix, I want to do a video with the guys who are experts, right? As a certified lubrication specialist, I do know something about filters, and obviously my time at Gibbs, working with the guys at Wix, we did this kind of work. So we have our own backstory, which I just shared. So I want to bring them on and do a video specifically on filters where we can get into things like bypass pressures and how different things like, ester-based oils can actually have an impact on the life of the anti-drain back valves and things like that. So there's a whole ball of wax here, Pandora's box to get into it, filters. But the key thing to keep in mind, thank you, Sterling. I appreciate that. The key thing with filters, back to the question about efficiency, is this. When you have a filter that is very efficient, right? It's removing a lot of stuff from the oil. Its capacity is going to be less, right? It will be full sooner. If you have a filter where you need it to go a very long time between oil changes, it can't be as efficient. To have more capacity, you have to have less efficiency. It's kind of like octane and cetane. If you increase octane, you decrease cetane. If you increase cetane, you decrease octane. They're just diametrically opposed. So capacity and efficiency are the same thing with filters. So I want to get some real filter experts, people that have, engineers that have spent their life working on filtering and have seen it all on the channel, do some videos and be able to really deep dive into that. So what's the interesting thing? All right. So this question that Andrew just threw up there about Fram Dexo synthetic. Well, Fram makes me think about filters, right? Even though he's talking about the oil, that's another question. We're going to get into private label oils in an upcoming video. But what you'll see sometimes when you have these oil filters made for synthetic media, and when you see a test and they're not as efficient, well, now you know why. With the synthetic oil going longer oil change intervals to increase the capacity of that filter so it doesn't plug and go into bypass before you reach the oil change, they have to have less efficiency. So if you're going to be doing short oil drain intervals, because that's how you're programmed, you don't need the synthetic oil change filter, right? Not saying synthetic media, the synthetic oil change filter. You want to use the regular filter that is going to have better efficiency with less capacity because you're not going to go that far, right? So just keep those things in mind when it comes to filters. Now let's hop over here. I mean, this was a good one to look at too, just for perspective, right? A human hair is about 70 microns in size. But the smallest your eye can see is about 40 microns. And 1.5 thousandths is equal to 32 microns. So when you're in that 20 micron to 30 micron range, those are particles that can do damage in an engine. They're pretty close, right? Some stuff even smaller can do it. So the filters are important. You need to have a good quality filter. Again, I'm biased because I worked at Gibbs and worked with the guys at Wix. You're going to find a regular Wix filter on everything I have. Because I'm doing so many oil changes, trying to get as many oils tested for everybody as possible, I'm not using the Wix XP because I'm not going farther. I'm using the regular Wix filter because I'm not going far. Right? I'd rather have the higher efficiency, less capacity, because I'm never going to max out the capacity on the filter. All right, next question. Here we go. Number 3, we're in the home stretch, everybody. Here we go. Are OEM oils specs special just marketing? The question a minute ago about, the Dexos and all that kind of stuff. This question was, is there anything special about Castrol Professional 5W30? It's the oil that Land Rover specifies for all their vehicles. It's really expensive. Need an alternative. Oh, yes. Thank you. I do have the coolest name. But I didn't choose it. My dad gave it to me. Right. And so a little fun fact. My dad got his name from my grandfather's 2 business partners' last name. So my dad was the oops child. He was 8 years after all of his other siblings. And so Pappy named my dad Lake Chambers. Obviously, his last name was Speed because it was a guy named Bob Lake and Paul Chambers were his 2 business partners. So I'm Lake Chambers Speed Jr. So there you go. That has nothing to do with oil. Back to oil, right? Hers is not a hybrid. This is a regular Corolla, by the way, Jonathan. So let's get to the answers here in the questions. All right. So when it comes to manufacturer spec, and let's address recommendations. So it's pretty common that specialty manufacturers, like a Jaguar or a Land Rover, even GM in this case, right? They'll have some affiliations with an oil company. So they will not just recommend a spec, they'll recommend a certain oil, right? I'm a Porsche Club of America member, and we all know if you're in the PCA that Porsche recommends Mobil 1 0W40. Now, like they have a specific oil they recommend, right? Does that mean that's the only oil you can use in your engine? By no means does that mean that. It just means that that's the marketing relationship they have. If you look deeper, you'll find that there is an OEM specification. Like that's what the GM Dexos is. Dexos is a spec. It's not a brand, it's a spec. And usually those specs are designed to meet a requirement that they want. Sometimes it's fuel economy, sometimes it's deposit protection. You know, we mentioned earlier, as they go lower in viscosity with these oils, they're changing the additive chemistry. As they go from naturally aspirated engines to turbocharged engines, now turbocharger protection, deposit control becomes a bigger thing. If they're going to push longer oil drain intervals, they're going to want to make sure that the oxidation protection is there. So in general, manufacturer specs are a good thing to follow because they're trying to make sure that that engine is protected. Now, people complain that, like GM, that Dexos is a money grab. Well, I know the guys at GM, and when they developed that, we were doing that work with them on the low-speed pre-ignition. Their point of view was this, is that what they needed to do was fund the testing. So they're charging a license fee, which is more expensive than API, but that was because they were actually self-funding. They didn't have the whole breadth of API to draw from. They had only their vehicles to draw from. So they're charging a much higher licensing fee. And that they were going to do is take that money from the licensing fee, put that back into the development of testing so they can continue to move forward and amp things up. Now, one of the questions that is not here in the chat necessarily, but I've seen it over and over again is, why does the Pennzoil Ultra Platinum not have the Dexos spec versus the regular Pennzoil Platinum that does? Yeah, the Guru Stud. Yeah, licensing does cost money, and the GM licensing costs the most. And that's part of the answer. It's really twofold. That when you have a Dexos licensed product, you're paying more in licensing for that product, which eats into your margin. The other thing with Dexos is that there's no read across, and that the exact chemistry, everything in that formula is what the license. Yes, you go look at the Dexos licenses, even for AC Delco, for the same viscosity grade, exact same part number, you're going to find 4 or 5 different individual Dexos licenses for the exact same product. Why? It's because every time they change the base oil supplier, it has to be a new license, because the entire formulation has to be disclosed, and the entire complete formulation is licensed. Unlike API, where you can submit one formula, say a 0W20, for example, and then you can have base oil read across, where you can change base oil vendors. As long as it's the same type, you don't have to retest. One license for API 020 covers a bunch of different viscosity grades and a bunch of different base oil formulations. Dexos, one license, one formula. And that's the other answer, is that when you get something Dexos licensed, you have to disclose everything to GM. So in some cases, some manufacturers choose not to reveal what's in that oil. They don't want anybody to know. They don't want it to get out. So they just don't pay the license, and they don't disclose what's in there. And if you don't do those two things, you can't be licensed regardless of how well it performs. So those are the really important pieces on that. Let's go take a look up here real quick. Yeah, the next piece of this, is just so you know, is API SP, or the API specs, right? We mentioned in the video about 0W8 and 0W16, is that now all of the 08, 012, 016, they're all available. They've all been approved and accepted into API. And the next API and ILSAC spec is coming next March. So as of March 31st, 2025, there's going to be the ILSAC GS7, and that is the starburst symbol right here. And SP will change to SQ. So that's what's coming next year, right? Is that. So these are all the little things that are happening. Everything's always changing with API, which why I say, listen, don't mess around with additives and other stuff and worry about brands, is because the chemistry is changing all the time. Everything's changing. So there's a lot of little details here. Hopefully that's been helpful. All right, let's get on here to number 2, right? This question's been asked a bunch of times. What's the best oil, right? So Justin Lucas said, or asked, there are lots of brands of oil in the market. For an everyday driver gas engine, what do you think is the best brand overall that provides the best protection? All right, people who are watching, in the comments, tell me what you think the answer is. If you've been paying attention, you're going to know this is not a brand, right? There's not a single best brand. There isn't, right? I know people have their favorite brands, and that's fun to have your favorite brands. But there's not a single best brand. And the reason for that, clean oil. Clean oil is really, really important. Yeah. Clean, cool, and dry. That will be a future video, by the way. We'll really, really dig into that. But here, let's check this out real quick. Back to this slide. We showed it earlier, right? It's all about the application. There are no magic mystery molecules. Different color oils, purple, red, green, blue, that's all dye. That has nothing to do with anything being special, right? The same base oil is in all of these products. It's the different chemistry. Now, some brands tend to have they'll go to the higher end of the spec. Some brands tend to go to the lower end of the spec. You know, the price conscious guys, they tend to go to the lower end of the spec. The guys who are bespoke brands tend to go to the higher end of the spec. But to be API licensed, to be Dexos licensed, they still have to meet. They got to play inside that box. And here's the key thing, right? We mentioned this in this video, right? If you've not watched this video, this is really where you can kind of base and get your compass oriented on all of this. In the Too Much Zinc video, we showed how different metallurgy changes which oil works the best. Well, that's thinking for a second, because most of us have no idea what the metallurgy of your engine is. Like in this case, when this testing we were doing was ring on liner test. So when you change the piston ring material, when you change the liner material, it changes which oil works best. So an oil that works really good in, say, a Porsche 996 engine that has, you know, an AMSOIL bore with a steel ring is going to work different than an engine that has an iron bore with a plasma moly faced ring. That's just the facts. And I'm not trying to down any brands. I'm not trying to tell anybody you shouldn't have a favorite brand. That's fine, have a favorite brand. But just understand there's not a single oil on the market that works best in every engine. In fact, when we did the oil change on my Boxster recently, and we showed about that, we showed that, look, the GP1 oil from Driven, which I formulated that, right? So I got no bias here. The GP1 that I formulated that works the best in a small block Chevy didn't work as good in my Porsche Boxster engine. Changed the ring material, ring coating, cylinder wall coating, bore finish. Now the DI oil, again, I have no favorites, right? They're both my kids. The DI oil, which isn't as good in the flat tappet Chevy engine, was better in my Boxster. So if you only looked at one test, you would say, well, that oil's best. But that's not the case, right? So again, I'm not trying to pick on brands. I'm just saying there isn't. You can't say there's one oil that works best in everything, because it's simply not true, because all engines are different. You could have chrome faced rings, you could have moly faced rings, you could have PVD coated rings, you've got Nicosil bores, you've got AluSil bores, you've got plasma spray bores, you've got DLC coated parts that hate molybdenum or some molybdenums. You have just all these different metallurgies and coatings and engine designs. There's not one oil that works best for all of them, but you can find what oil works best for you via used oil analysis. You can get there if you do the work, right? And I'll pull this slide up, and I'm going to do a video. Oh, Kendall. Actually, you're wrong. I will test AMSOIL. I already bought some recently, and we are going to test it in the Dyno Mule, and we're going to show that in the video coming up. So don't say I won't, because we're going to. Already plan on doing it. Hang on. I'm going to leave this slide up so you can look at it. But this is the framework, right? And one of the things that's key here is this is for a brand new engine right from the go. You can skip down to step 3 if you want to, right? Jonathan, I have no idea when there's going to be more 08. As more Toyotas get sold that recall for 0W8, then probably other people will come on and have that available. Right now, the only two that I know are Ineos and Mobil have 0W8, but I've never seen them in the wild. I've been told there is, but I've never seen them in the wild. I've only been able to find the Toyota 08 at the local dealership. All right, but this whole framework, one reason why I'm recommending starting with the OEM oil is because that's what they did all of their dyno testing with. All their fleet testing, all the dyno testing they've done is with their oil or their spec. So if you start off with their oil, then you're apples to apples. You're using what they used to validate the performance of that engine. The used oil analysis can tell you whether or not that oil is doing a good job for you. Good job being defined as having 5 parts per million or less per 1,000 miles on a standard 4,000 to 6,000 mile drain interval. If you're between 4,000 miles, 6,000 miles on your drain interval, and you have less than 5 parts per million wear metals in the oil, you're good. You don't really need to do anything more. If you want to, you can try to get it down to 1 or 2. It's possible. We've seen it. But if you're under 5, you're good. If the OEM oil does that for you, awesome. If the OEM's too expensive, you can try finding a replacement. Just make sure it meets the same spec and see if it can get you there. And if neither the OEM spec or any aftermarket brand with the recommended viscosity gets you below that, then you go up in viscosity. And you keep going up in viscosity until you get there. Because some guys are going to be towing all the time. And if you're towing all the time, you might need more HTHS, high temperature, high shear, viscosity to protect the engine. Dealt with a customer this week doing oil analysis. That's the case. He's got 040, tried 2 different 040s. That's what factory suggests. His copper's through the roof, but he tows all the time. Okay, try 540. See if you can increase that shear stability. May need to go to a 1540, even make it more shear stable to see if increasing the HTHS, that's the difference between a 040 and a 15W40, is going to be a higher HTHS as part of the SA J300 spec. Maybe that'll get the job done. He'll know the answer to that by doing used oil analysis. That's the key. All right. So again, I'll pull this back up. If you want to screenshot it, you can read it over, but I will do a video about this in detail so we can have it. Now, I think what we got? Here we go. Everyone's been asking me this question since we started the channel, right? And even today in the chat, right? People are saying, what about AMSOIL? What about AMSOIL? All right. So Rob Shama is the chief marketing officer at AMSOIL. I've been in contact with Rob. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is because Rob is the former CEO of Afton. So when I was at Gibbs and we began working with Afton to develop new products, Rob's the guy that gave him the green light to allow us to buy components, not additive packages, but buy components from Afton so we could develop our own bespoke formulas. And so I have a relationship with Rob. I have history with Rob. And I've reached out to Rob. We're going to have a meeting with the guys at AMSOIL this coming week, actually, about me coming up there and doing a video and being able to visit the facility, talk to their chemists, look at some of the test facility they have. So we are going to go there with them and have that conversation with those guys and let them talk a little bit about what they believe in their brand. Because one of the reasons I haven't mentioned much about it, and I've purposely avoided this topic, is because AMSOIL is like a paradox to me. I have very conflicting feelings about AMSOIL, and let me explain why. This is what I hate about AMSOIL. And you guys have seen me before. You've watched a lot of times. I hate oil marketing. I hate oil marketing. And this 4-ball wear test is one of the worst offenders in oil marketing, because that is stainless steel on stainless steel. Where in an engine do we see stainless steel on stainless steel? Actually, not stainless steel, my bad. That's 52-100 bearing steel on 52-100 bearing steel. Where does that contact exist in an engine? It doesn't. You don't have pure sliding like that in an engine. This is what I didn't like about their marketing. I say past tense, right? So don't, AMSOIL fans, don't roast me. Just hear me out. This is what I hated, is that they used to do this. They used to use 4-ball wear test. The 4-ball wear test has an appetite for a high level of calcium sulfonate. So when you put more calcium sulfonate to have a higher TBN oil, it would perform better in this test. But that doesn't mean that it works better in an engine. So I've always hated that marketing approach. So that's what I didn't like. But I said I was conflicted because there's things I like about them and things I didn't like about them. What I did like about them is not only did they use, PAO base oils. Like I remember one time we were at an STLE event, and the guys from ExxonMobil took us all out, took all their customers out for excursion. And I was on the same bus as the guys from AMSOIL. So obviously we were buying PAO base oil from ExxonMobil, and they were buying base oil from ExxonMobil. So, okay, there's only 3 companies that make PAO. So if you're using PAO, you're buying it from either INEOS, ExxonMobil, or Chevron Phillips, right? And we ended up doing more Chevron Phillips, and that became our main supplier. But at the time, we did buy some stuff from ExxonMobil. So we're all there. So I'm like, I know the guys from AMSOIL are buying good quality base oil. When I did, lectures and stuff, I did at Afton University. They were there, so I knew they were buying stuff from Afton. So I know they buy good quality chemicals, and they're trying to make a good quality product. The marketing part is what just drove me nuts. I hated that. I hate that marketing. I do. I hate oil marketing, and I especially hate it when they do stuff like that. But what I loved it is that they really had that full picture approach, that they really we're into doing filters, oil analysis, stuff like that. Rick, thank you so much. And yes, we are actually going to do a breakdown on boutique oils. So in a upcoming video, I'm going to go up to the guys at HPL and we're going to show you, we're going to make an API GM Dexos licensable oil. We're not paying a license, but we're going to show you exactly how to make an API SP GM Dexos 1 Gen 3 licensable oil. And then we're going to show you how you can turn that into a boutique oil, what those differences are. So that video is coming up that will give you the deep dive on that. But hopefully all that kind of helps make sense. You know, what it boils down to is this. At the end of the day, throw all the marketing away. Get rid of all the brands. Don't pay attention to that. Proper lubrication is the 4 R's. You want the right oil. That means it's the right viscosity and the additive packages for the application. Like I said, there are no magic molecules. There's 4 companies that make this stuff. It's about how you put it together. There aren't like liquid titanium. I saw that in the chat. You know, those kind of things. The titanium was coming from Afton. Afton invented that as a marketing differentiator, that people wanted to have something they could claim that's different than what everybody else had. So they used titanium as part of a friction modifier package. But there's not the only company, right? So Afton invented it. It was originally only with Kendall. Then that expired, and then they started selling it to Castrol. But when you see something like Castrol Edge had titanium, but now it doesn't, it means they changed additive packages. That means they may have changed additive suppliers. Maybe they're not buying from Afton anymore. Maybe they're buying from Lubrizol or Ornite or Infinium. I don't know. But Afton's the one that invented the titanium chemistry. So when you see titanium in the new oil, that means that they're buying one of the packages from Afton that contains that, whether it's one that they develop specifically for that customer, because they do if you're big enough, or if it's one of their market general packages. Again, we'll explain that in the other video coming up. But the key thing is, like I said before, it's right oil is right viscosity and the additives for the application. There's no amount of zinc that can fix bad geometry, right? For the flat type of guys out there, if your lifter bores are not in the right location, no amount of zinc is going to fix it. Little fun story here. I know we've gone overtime. We're almost 2 hours. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully you guys aren't upset about me going too long. The key is geometry. And my story I was going to say is that out at Blueprint Engines in Kearney, Nebraska, they used to build flat tap, or they still build flat tappet engines, but they used to build everything from a used block, right? So they would have to get a core block in, machine it, rebuild it. And they did, like everybody else. They had flat tappet camshaft problems, put the zinc in the oil, did all the different things, jump onto, do all your hocus pocus dances, try to keep the cams from failing. And there was still, recurrent camshaft failures that just happened despite all their best efforts. Eventually, they had problems with getting core blocks. So they decided to have new blocks cast over in Germany and began machining their own blocks in-house. As soon as they started machining their own blocks and every lifter bore was in the correct location, 0 flat tappet camshaft failures. And these are not the highest end, hardest cores with coated lifters and all that. These are budget cores, budget lifters. 0 flat tappet camshaft failures. Geometry is more important than anything else. If the lifter is not in the correct location, if it's not spinning, it does not stand a chance, no matter how much zinc you put in the oil. And I've already said before earlier, and we're going to show you in an upcoming video, you can run an API SP oil right off the shelf in a flat tappet engine if the geometry is correct without extra zinc. It is possible. Okay. Next thing, it's got to be at the right place, right time, right amount. I will say conclusively, the best part about coming to work for Total Seal is that it's really brought to light those last three. Because I'm not selling oil. I'm not tied to any brand, but I can still see failures. We see it all the time. When we see lubrication problems. The best oil in the whole world sitting on the shelf does not help your engine. It's got to be in the crankcase. Then it's got to be where it needs to be, when it needs to be, and enough of it. So anytime you have a lubrication related problem, or you believe it's lubrication related, be it wear or a failure, ask yourself those 4 questions. Well, did I have an oil that met the spec, that was the right viscosity? And if I did, well, then let's think. Did we get enough of the oil where it was supposed to be, when it was supposed to be? If you can't answer yes to those last 3, it's probably not the first. We'll get blamed for a lot of things. A lot of times, it's the lack of lubrication. I know one of the questions about going thicker on VVT engines, that's really a question of the environment you live in. Back to the earlier part, that can be a problem if you're operating in a cold environment where there's not enough flow. Then it can be an issue. But if you're in a warm environment, it's not going to be an issue because it's getting the right oil, right place, right time, right amount. In a colder environment, you're going to need a lower winter grade to make sure you get enough oil flow. So maybe if you're having wear in an engine that has MDS, maybe you need to go from a 520 to a 040. That way you're getting the flow you need, but you're also bumping up the viscosity. But only do that based on used oil analysis data that says you need to make a change away from the 520 that the factory called for. If your wear rate's higher than 5 parts per million per 1,000 miles on a 4,000 to 6,000 mile drain interval, then okay, make changes. But if it's not, don't. Only make decisions based on data, not opinions. That's the key, right? So let me pop this back up here one more time because I do appreciate everyone hanging out. So about 10 minutes after we're done, and we've already gone 2 hours, but it's okay. About 10 minutes after we're done here, I'll have that discount code live at the Speed Diagnostic site, and it will be up and available for the rest of this month. So you can use promo code YT10 at checkout to get 10% off any Speed Diagnostics oil test kits. That way, if you want me to do the testing for you, then I can do it. But you don't have to go to just us, right? You can use any lab you want to. I mean, obviously, anywhere in the world, there's usually going to be a Caterpillar close by, and the Caterpillar guys have labs and they can do this stuff. Now, they're not going to be able to tell you nuances about high performance engines like I can, but they can tell you about tractors because they're good at that, right? So key thing is, regardless of who you use to do used oil analysis, it's good to do used oil analysis because the way to become that valedictorian, the A+ student, is putting in the extra effort. Used oil analysis is that extra effort that gives you the data that sends you to the next level, that helps you answer all these questions. And with that, I can't thank you guys enough, guys and gals, enough, because this has truly been incredible. Thank you so much for stumbling with me and not looking this way and doing all that. I'm definitely not a live stream pro. Moses, that does the editing for me, makes me look a lot better in the videos than if you were sitting there watching me do all this stuff. He does a great job with that. And really, the reality of this whole live stream came up because he got sick, right? So the video that was supposed to come out today wasn't going to come out because I wasn't going to publish one that I've edited as bad, right? So this was giving him a weekend off. So in 2 weeks, we'll have the next video. We're back on track, but also wanted to take this chance to try something different because you guys have changed my life. This has been amazing. I'm dead serious. You guys and gals that have been watching these videos and sharing them and commenting and building this community around people that care about oil, that care about their engines, that want to be the valedictorian. This is incredible. And it's inspiring me. And I wanted to take this time to be able to interact with everybody and give back a little bit, try to look at the comments. Again, I'm not, I'm learning this, right? This whole live stream thing is new to me still, but hopefully I'll get better at it in the future and be able to look out of the corner of my eye and do all the stuff that I need to do and be a little more smooth and polished with it. But anyway, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And we'll see you at the next video, because the motto of this channel, it's science, not speculation. So have some fun, getting some science. We'll see you next time.